Okay, I'm going to share this. Hang on, let's go to share. All right. So for those who are listening to this are going to listen to this online next week or over the next few weeks, we are covering First Samuel chapter 2. Uh, for Samuel chapter 2, we're going to deal with the corruption of the priesthood. We're going to talk a little about Shiloh or Shiloh, depending on how you pronounce it. We're going to talk a little bit about where other than Jerusalem, the Ark and the priesthood served here for about 360 plus years in this one area. But during this period of time, we're coming to the end of that 360 plus years. And as we go into this chapter, you're going to see exactly why God had to destroy it, and it was a shadow of what was going to happen in Jerusalem. So if they didn't learn their lesson here, then once it came to Jerusalem, they're going to be the same things would come knocking on their door. So, so First Samuel chapter 2. We're going to, last week we talked about Samuel. He was gonna be raised in the courts of the Lord. We showed you how this was a common practice that happened from the time really of Joshua, because he was raised in basically the courts of the tabernacle all the way into the first century. When you see this in the during the Feast of Tabernacle, you see these young children, they're serving and during the water libation service. You have children from 1 to 8 riding the oxes and dipping the water and passing it on to the priests, and which are going to use in the ceremony. So the practice of having Samuel being raised in the courts was not new. In fact, it happened way prior to this. But we also looked at his lineage being of Levite lineage, even though Scripture talks about him being an Ephraimite, he's actually a Levite within the tribal area of Ephraim. All right, so let's go to this first scripture here. I'm going to jump, kind of set the tone here. 1 Samuel 2, verse 31. Behold, the days are coming that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house. He's referring to Eli, so that there will not be an old man in your house. And this is reference to the God's house, the tabernacle or the temple. And you'll see an enemy in my dwelling place. This is a reference to the Philistines. Despite all the good which God does to Israel, there shall not be an old man in your house forever. And that's a pretty strong statement, right? But any of your men whom I do not cut off from my altar shall consume your eyes and grieve your heart. So, in other words, if they live past the age of 50, uh, it's going to be no, I'm saying that if they continue to serve past the age of 50, the Lord says they're going to basically grieve your heart, and we're going to see this with Caiaphas. He's way past the age of 50, and he grieves the people, right? And all the descendants of your house shall die in the flower of their age. And so this is a direct statement toward the priests and the sons of Aaron. So from the very beginning, uh, we find the sons of Aaron have two branches. Ones are the descendants of Itamar, and the others are descendant of Eleazar. Eleazar's son, and the Bible says it calls him Phineas, but it's actually pronounced Pincus. He gets a covenant of peace. And that line was supposed, from that line of Eleazar, every high priest should have served from that line coming from Eleazar, not from the line of Ittamar. Now, the line of Ittamar could become priests. They could serve inside the inner courtyard, but they were not supposed to be the high priest. Eli is a descendant of Ittamar. And so after this period of time, we're gonna see a change that's gonna slowly be taking place, and we'll show you here in a minute. In Ezekiel 44, it slams the door shut. In the future, when Yeshua comes, it's going to slam the door shut on anybody from Itamar's line and serving as a high priest. Now, Eli at this time was 98, and so when he does it, he'd probably served in this position for 40 years. Wait, what the Lord is saying, that's way past what he expected them to do. They should have been a turnover. And so he was still serving as a high priest, even though his sons were doing most of the daily avodah, the service itself. Okay.
But his sons were awful.
Yeah,
Eli.
well, we're gonna deal specifically with that, but there was it goes beyond just the fact that they were awful. Okay, there's much more to
Yeah,
it,
oh,
and
I know that's horrible.
but
Worse than
what I
that.
was getting at is there was a what we call um, there was a line of the sons of Aaron that were serving in the high priesthood that were not supposed to from the very beginning. And so
Mm.
when you get in this period of time, is what I'm getting at. When you in this period of time and then into the first century, the line of Itamar, which should have never served as a high priest, okay, they had usurped the position. However, they ended up in the position, maybe by the fact that there was not somebody readily available. Who knows why Eli was serving in the place? But Eli should have never been a high priest from the very beginning
Oh,
because
wow.
there was no covenant of peace that was made with his line. Him and his sons could serve in the avodah. The avodah is a service. They could do the slaughtering. They could deal with the menorah, and they could even serve at the altar of incense once in their lifetime. But they were not ever supposed to be a high priest. And so this is because that covenant peace that was made with Pinchas, or as most in Christianity they just call him Phineas. But that's one of the reasons. So even though they acted corruptly, as you're referring to, there's much more to the story, and that's kind of what I get into. So usually it takes like kind of what I say a devastating situation to make a change. You can look at modern day politics now. We have a crushing debt, but yet nobody wants to do about it. And so until nobody gets paid and nobody gets a social security check and we're in bankruptcy, there won't be any changes because people don't do anything until devastation hits them. And this is the same thing that's going to happen in the priesthood. Until, you know, Shiloh is burnt to the ground, there will be no changes. And it's just the way human beings operate. They don't want to look at a problem, address the problem, and make the changes necessary to put themselves in a place where they can get on the right track. They just don't do it. And so that's what you're seeing right happen here. So if you go back in time, back to the time when they were in the wilderness, in Numbers chapter 25, verse 10, it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pinchas, or Phineas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Therefore say, Behold, I give to him a covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and his lineage, his descendants after him, a covenant of everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement, or he ransomed the children of Israel." So this was the beginning. So we're talking about somewhere in the 1420s, 1430s BC. It was established with this line to become the high priest position, which is supposed to be. So you go 400 years later from this, and you got somebody from the line of Ithamar who's serving, and that's Eli.
Okay, and where
So
did Ithamar come from? I'm sorry, I didn't
he's a,
catch
he,
that.
so Ithamar is Eleazar's brother. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
they could serve, and they serve as priests. They could go into the inner courtyard. They could put altar the incense on the altar. They could slaughter and do the offerings, but they were never supposed to serve as the high priest.
Mm.
So as you would go from Aaron to Eleazar, from Eleazar to Pinchas, it should have continued down to the time of the days of Eli, where there's somebody from that line, and that did not happen. We're going to see here in
Mm.
a few minutes where the priesthood would get split. And you'll see in 2 Samuel 19, verse 11. So King David sent to Zadok, this is one priest, and Abiatar, the other one priest, saying, Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the king, to his very house? You are my brethren, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring the king? So let me explain what's happening here. Absalom is declared a civil war on his father and is trying to take over the kingship. Okay,
Mm.
Abiatar, who is a descendant of Eli, he's from the line of Itamar. He is serving at this point. What happened is the you have the Ark of the Covenant is in in a tent. It's been protected, and then in a separate place they're doing the offerings. Okay, so Abiatar is serving as high priest in where the offerings are take place, and then Zadok is serving where the Ark of the Covenant is. So what we have here at this time is a split priest. There's two high priests serving in two different locations, and this is the beginning of the end for the line of Ittamar. So after this, because Abiatar basically was treasonous and joined Absalom, Zadok becomes the sole high priest, and his line would go all the way into the Babylonian exile. And so this is what I'm getting at. So when you're looking back in time, it would take literally Shiloh being burned to the ground for us to even get to a split priesthood before finally the Zadok line could officially take over in their proper position. I hope that makes sense.
Good.
So when you come back from, and here's the sad part. So when they come back from Babylon, um you have Joshua the high priest. He's from this line of Zadok. But after the Hasmoneans take over, they're corrupted, and the breakdown of the priesthood starts during the Hasmonean period. By the time the Romans take over Judea, it's the line of Itamar is being purchased, or they're selling, and they're corrupting themselves to become the price. So the house of Annas, Caiaphas, they who are descendants of Itamar are back in charge of the priesthood, even though it should have been in the line of Zadok. It did not happen. So, yeah, you see how these things go wrong really quick when man takes charge, and so all this corruption. And when you're looking at the bigger picture, God set up the proper way to make it happen, and then man gets involved and gets corrupted, and it goes sideways, and that's what you're seeing here in the priesthood. Before we get into specific details, Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons, before we even talk about what they did, you can see that there was a proper order, and by the time Eli comes in, they were out of order, if that makes sense. Any
Mm,
questions on that? Does everybody make sense for everybody?
yeah.
Okay. Now, in Ezekiel 44, you'll see here, and you guys, I've read this before to you guys. So during the millennial reign, when Yeshua comes back and rules from Jerusalem, this will be straightened out. So Ezekiel 44:10 tells the story. And the Levites who went far from me, the line of Ittamar, when Israel went astray, who strayed away from me after their idols, they shall bear their iniquity. Yet they shall be ministers to my sanctuary. So they can come in the inner courtyard, they can be gatekeepers of the house and ministers of the house. They shall slay the burnt offerings. So they can do the slaughter. They can put the offerings on the bronze altar, and they can serve directly with the people, and they can minister to the people, but they will be prohibited from ministering to the Messiah. They cannot go in his chambers. They cannot minister to him. So in verse 15 it goes on. It says, "But the priests, the Levites, the sons of Aaron from the sons of Zadok, who kept my charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near me to minister to me," as the position of the high priest, as a position
Mm,
dealing with the altar of incense, uh, coming near when they come near the Lord. So most likely anything that happens within the holy place and the holy of holies will be the Zadoks. Everything outside of the holy place or the holy of holies will be the other Levites will be serving this position. So it's confirming what happened from the beginning. Is everybody kind of getting the big picture?
yeah, I see
Now,
now.
is that referring to in the New Testament when Jesus actually comes, or is
Yeah.
that
So
not?
when he comes the second time. So when he came the first time, the house of Annas and Caiaphas, his nephew, right? They were descendants of Itamar, and they
Okay,
had bought the position from the Romans. The Romans had basically did a lottery, and they bought the position with their money.
okay,
And so, but there was no Zadok during the time. So from the time of Yeshua's birth to his death, and then all the way to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, there was never a person from the line of Zadok who served in the high priesthood.
mm,
Okay. And if unless you study the temple service, this is easy not to see, but God values loyalty, and that's why Pincus was rewarded from being loyal from back what happened during the rebellion that killed 24,000 back in Numbers chapter 25.
Robert, I keep thinking back to a diagram that you made a couple of months ago of concentric circles and degrees as being set apart in terms, and it was in the context of different dietary laws. There's the high
Right.
priest, there's the priests, there's Israel, there's the God-fearers I would add in there, and then there's the nations, and how each are have different standards by which they are judged and have different standards to which they're called, I think, especially certainly with the dietary comment or aspects. So,
Yeah, I want to do something on the dietary things in another day because after going to the temple study that I did with Rico Cortez, one of the things I realized and I it did click for me, and then maybe you guys got it clicked for you, but um, every time you come to an appointed time, whether it be Passover or Shavuot, Pentecost, or Tabernacles, during these appointed times, when they're either a feast or just an appointed time, uh, these are covenant meals. And if you're going to come to the table of the Lord, you have to eat according to his ways. Okay. You're going to be required, or you cannot be at his table. And so, example, and he said, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, let's look at how he addressed the man who came to the wedding and didn't have the proper attire. Okay.
Mm.
He was kicked out. What did he say? He was kicked out into outer darkness for not having the proper attire. Now that was a shadow of his heart condition, his loyalty. But from the pure statement, you don't have the proper clothes, you can't be at my table. Get out of here. Okay, and so when you look at a lot of this stuff, this is covenant, and God. The closer you get to His presence, as Tyler was addressing, the closer you get to His presence, the more strict you need to be with your behavior. This is why what Hophni and Phineas do, what they do is an atrocity because they're directly in the presence of the Lord and what they did. So I want to take a look at this picture here. If you can see here, okay, this is a diagram done by Scott Strickland. He's from Katy, Texas. He is the lead archaeologist on the dig at Shiloh. Uh, a few years ago, there was a Jewish guy named uh, uh, I think what's his name, Israel Finkenstein. He would so he did. If you can look right here, this what's in orange. He did his digs there. Okay, and then there was a Danish excavation that did the blue. And
Mm.
by the way, just for uh, the interest here, I find it very interesting that probably somebody representing Ephraim and somebody representing the tribe of Dan and somebody representing Judah, three different people, leads, are doing the excavation at Shiloh. This it may not escape to you. The irony to me doesn't escape me that the three that are involved in this is Ephraim, Dan, and Judah that are involved in here. But if you can see what Strickland's done, he's spent most of his time in the area. You see number two right there. This is in the area of the tabernacle area, and so when we get into the specifics, and I'm going to come back to this drawing here. You'll have the priest that would be living over here in this area. Okay, and then you would have the Shiloh, which was had a Shiloh itself had a concrete foundation, but kept the tabernacle coverings on it. And then you had priestly quarters, probably where the treasury was, where they kept the wood, where they bring the animals in. All this stuff was around the tabernacle itself, and then you probably had separate buildings. Remember, see this number one over here?
Mhm.
Remember that when we start talking about those two sons, remember these buildings here, okay? Just keep that in your mind. Don't forget that because I want to go back and address that later on. And if you can see down here, it's a bad picture. It's been cut off, but this is what the structure looks like now with the
When were
dig.
they doing those digs, Robert? What year?
Uh, so I believe that it's been about 25 years ago that Finkelstein started his, and then the Danes have been worked about 6 to 7 years ago. Scott Strickland took over. Dr. Strickland took over, I think 4.5, 5 years ago,
Mm.
and after that, everything began to come into play. Everybody starts
Wow.
seeing it. He's pretty famous guy. You guys should look him up. Just put Dr. Scott Strickland, Katy, Texas, and he has a website and he goes over all this dig sites and everything else. So kind of important.
You can see it on Google Maps.
Yeah, you can. It's pretty good, right?
Oh,
You
wow.
can see this part down here that you can see. You can see it pretty clear. Okay, so three basic things, in my opinion, corrupted the priesthood. First was the way they dealt with the offerings, the mishandling of them. The book of Malachi spends the whole first chapter dealing with the mishandling of the offerings. So this is a big deal. It's not something that's light, how these are treated. The second thing, and we're going to get into specifics. The second thing is the treatment of the young women, the young maidens, the virgin women that were coming in to do sacrifice. Uh, in my opinion, I think that these two sons were treating this like a pagan shrine, where there was there's fornication going on. There's all kinds of stuff that are involved there, and that to me is one of the crimes that they committed because it resembled the way their behavior was resembling the shrines and the high places of the Canaanites and the other religions. Okay, and the third thing was the complete lack of supervision or accountability of Eli, their father. So those are the three things we're going to cover. Uh, Leading up to this point, though, the book of Judges addresses twice the situation. It says the man Micah, who was a Levite, okay. By the way, I think Micah was a descendant from Moses himself. I could be wrong, but I think so. The man Micah had a shrine and made an ephod and household idols, and he consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Okay, and then so that is dealing. Chapter 17 is dealing with the fall of Ephraim and how they led the nation in idolatry. That chapter, and then it ends with the statement, "Everybody did what was right in their own eyes." And then in Judges 21, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, and which is alluding to the fact that people were they were starting to want a king at this time because of the anarchy situation that was building. And again, it says everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
What was the year
So
then?
so this would be both of these would be why the shrine was at why it was at Shiloh. So you're looking in somewhere between the 1100s, okay, to about the time of Saul. So anywhere between 1050 BC up to about 1150, time of Samson. This is all going on. That last 100 years, this is the situation. And in my opinion, this is the current situation of the believers worldwide. Everybody does what's right in their own eyes. Everybody has their own belief system. Everybody worships in their own way, and there's no way that there's no order in the way we go about our worship. And that's why I think we're back at the time of Judges without a king, all right, without Yeshua as king, and everybody's just whatever they think feel in their heart. That's how they're going to worship or not worship at all. So, to address this, Tyler, the immorality of the tribe of Benjamin, where they turned to homosexuality, and then they tried to defend it, and then they massacred that girl, and then the father chopped her up in 12 pieces and sent her out to all the tribes, and there was a civil war. That's the time. It was during that civil war that both of these chapters are addressing. So
Hmm.
it was chaotic mess, is what it was. So at the end of the day, who's responsible for this? Um, in my opinion, the priesthood. See, you have Micah, a priest, or not a priest, Micah, a Levite,
Invite.
leading a tribe into idolatry. So who owns it? The Levites do. They own the idolatry. They own the chaos. They own the lack of morality in the nation. That it belongs to them. So 1 Samuel 1, verse 12 says, "Now the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. And the priest's customs with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, an offering, the priest's servant would come with a three-pronged flesh hook in his hand while the meat was boiling. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and the priest would take for himself all that the flesh brought up. So they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest servant would come and say to the man who sacrificed, give meat for roasting to the priest, for he will not take boiled meat from you, but raw. So when you read this, unless you understand temple service, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm going to kind of explain it here in a minute. So in 1 Samuel 2:16 says, and if the man said to him, they should really burn the fat first, then you may take as much as your heart desires. He would then answer, these two priests would answer and says, no, but you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force. Then it says in verse 17, therefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred, okay, the word there is despise the offerings of the Lord. That's a really bad place. I think we're in the same situation from the 1980s with the televangelists and all the criminal activity that's happened in the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
Worldwide, people are kind of in that same place. They abhor the service. They abhor coming to church. They despise it. They don't want to go there because they see the corruption. They see what's happened, and so we're kind of in. We're coming out of the 1980s and 90s where we saw a lot of bad stuff, and people are just walking away. That's where part of the great falling away is taking place. So back then they were just like, I'm just not going to go to Shiloh. I'm not going to come up to bring my tithe because what was meant for us, my when I bring my first fruits and I come in there and I offer it, my family should get a part of that, and you're taking it away. They're stealing. So the way it would go, the offer would announce he'd come in there, he'd and tell the sons the purpose. I'm here to do a sin offering or a trespass, or this is a peace offering. Okay. And then so they would bring the animal, would place at the entrance of the tent meeting. The offerer would place his hand, okay, on the animal. He would do the shikta. He would cut the animal's neck, and then the priest would take over. They would skin it. They first get the blood out. Okay, they would take the entrails and the fat around the entrails. And there's two things that happened right off from the beginning. They had to take the blood and pour it on the side of the altar. That's number one. And then they had to take the entrails and they had to place the entrails and the fat on the burnt offering, on the burn pile. Once that happens, then they would cut each animal in 8 pieces. They would place it on the fire, begin to either boil it or cook it in the manner that was prescribed from Leviticus 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Okay. And then once that's done, if it was a peace offering or it was a tithe that was brought in, then that meat would be shared with the offers coming up for tabernacles or coming up for Shavuot or for unleavened bread. So what these guys were doing is they weren't burning the fat or the entrails, which is really shady. Okay, it's very shady. Okay, and then they weren't giving the meat to the people that we're supposed to share with. It's one thing that they got their portion, because that's what Scripture says, they get their portion as a priesthood, but the rest should be shared if it's those other two offerings. They weren't doing that, and so from from just reading this, you're like, well, they're being stingy. That's not what's happening. To me, what I see happening is this is just an opinion. I can't prove it, but by them not burning the fat and the entrails means to me that these guys were involved in divination. Okay? This is what if you're not putting
Oh,
that stuff
yeah.
on the altar, you're involved in divination.
Mhm.
Any comments there?
Well, that would make sense because that's exactly what they use. The witches
Yeah,
used to do that. We lived up in Wairika where we were pastoring, and they were using the entrails of animals for their sacrifices, for their
disgusting.
sacrificial witches'
Yeah, they cut
covens
it
were
open
doing
and
that.
then they would do whatever witchcraft was involved.
Yep,
So I think I can't
exactly.
prove it, but they're being accused of doing this. They're telling
Mhm.
it you're not doing this, and so to me it just reeks of they
Yeah.
are they're doing something, and then I'll be able to, I think I can prove my point after we get in the way they treated the women. But First Samuel 2:29 says, "Why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering which I commanded in my dwelling place?" think ancient Near East. When you kick with your foot, you step on your foot, it means that you're despising something. You're showing complete disregard from it. And so the statement here, why do you kick at my offerings, my sacrifice, is a statement that these people had complete disregard. And I think if we go back to this right here, now the sons of Eli were corrupt, and we're proving that, right? But they did not know Jehovah. That to me
Yeah,
is the biggest statement right there. More than
right
anything
there.
else, they had no relationship whatsoever. And that's the crime. So if they wind up in outer darkness once they were killed, it's because they did not have any relationship. Just like in Matthew when it says, "Get away from me, I never knew you." It's the same statement. I have no idea who you are because you despise me. You never try to build a relationship. You never came and drew near me and found out the correct way to have relationship. So I think that's kind of a telltale right there.
Robert, the
Okay.
word kick is translated scorn. Why do you scorn my offering? Or so that's
Yeah,
kind of what you said.
that's
The word kick could be translated into scorn.
scorn is actually I mean, think if somebody scorns uh I mean you see I'll give you an example. Modern day you have um you have these judges here in the United States that scorn justice.
Mm.
They love their own ways, they love their own belief systems, but they scorn justice. Justice doesn't mean anything. The Constitution doesn't mean anything. So they will act according to their hearts, not according to justice. All right, so the second thing we're looking at, in my opinion, is the sexual immorality. And this to me jumped out at me really quick. From every um, cult site in the ancient world, many times there would be two things that happen. And you can go, I think it's Second Kings 17, I believe it is. It talks a little bit about the cultic sites, but uh, if you had a city and you weren't on a mountain or a hill, then what you would do is you build a ziggurat pyramid inside your city, and that would be the high place. If you had a mountain or a hill close to where you lived, then you'd put on that high place. That's where you build your cult site. Okay, and with all these locations, um, if you go and study even back to where when Judah has he asked where the shrine prostitute is. If you know the area that he's operating that highway, it runs through a mountain pass through an area. There's mountains, there's hills of Judah, Judea there, south of Jerusalem. There's these mountains where they would put the high places on, and there's where these shrine prostitutes would be. So these cultic sites would have you'd come into these sites, you bring your offerings, you bring your money, and then there would be you would go through a sexual practice with either the priestesses or the priest. There would be something going on there, and then you would make your offering, and then you go your way. All right, and all of them function this way. So from Greece to Mesopotamia to Egypt, all over the world, this is how it functioned. So here you got the sons of Eli doing this. First Samuel 2, verse 22. Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle meetings. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people." So what they were doing is, let's go back to the picture of Shiloh. So as they came here and they came to do worship, right? Like Hannah did, but she came with her husband. When they came to the door and they would bring the offerings to be brought or whatever the reason they were drawing near, they would pick out women and they would take them over to these side buildings over here, number one, and they would basically do exactly what Zimri did with the Midianite princess. Okay, same thing would take place, and so what was happening is the disrespect for a father's daughter. Okay, disrespect for um, these virgins or these virgins in Israel, the way they treated them was an abomination, complete abomination, and they were making Shiloh look like a cultic site of the pagans. Okay. So let's go back to where we were here. If we go back here. All right. So as they would come to the door, the tabernacle, this is where they would entice these women and take them off. And we saw earlier they were taking the meat away from the men, and they said that they're going to use force. So it tells me that they weren't just two, the whole priesthood there. They had allies. The other priests that were operating, the other sons of Aaron, were involved in this whole thing. They weren't just two guys being abusive. Because in order to be that abusive to all the men of Israel, there must have been a complete, a conspiracy was taking place. You guys follow me on this?
So where did the virgins come from that they were using as more or
They're
less
from
for their
Israel.
benefit?
Yeah, they would come up. They would come up, and many times they were from other Levites. There would be other Levites. Their daughters would come, and they could serve. They would be part of the service. They had specific things that they were involved in.
Okay. All right.
Either they were doing the curtains, or there was things that they were talented enough that they were working in and around the tabernacle. And just like today, there's women helping in the rebuilding of the third temple. There's a lot of women involved in the process to get this back
Mhm.
up and running right now. So back then, this is probably where what they were doing. There, in my opinion, there are probably a lot of daughters, other Levitical priests or Levites, part of the chorus, part of the orchestra, part of the gatekeepers, the ones raising animals. It was their daughters probably being abused. That was so horrible about it. So um, if you have something to compare to this, um, you look at the word here, or when you look back at Zimri, let's go read that real quick. So in Numbers chapter 25, verse 1, it says, Now Israel remained in an acacia grove. Circle that word there. And the people began to commit harlotry, that's fornications, that word there, with women of Moab. They invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel was joined to Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. So let me give you context what's happening here. Okay. Usually, so if they didn't have a high place, another location where these shrines would be placed were in groves. Okay. So these groves, an acacia grove is the wood that you would grow to do the furniture in the tabernacle comes from acacia. So this is why they basically had probably planted a grove here to use the wood so they could use to build furniture and replace and stuff like that. So uh, they had come into this grove. They set up a tabernacle or a tent. Okay. They had women from Midianite princes who worshiped Baal Peor. And so they had created a shrine in this grove right near Israel. Verse 6. And indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brothers a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel. So it says right here, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of the meeting. Why were they weeping? Because 24,000 had just been killed for what was happening here. There was a big plague that knocked them out. So it was the plague was still growing and people were still dying, and so people were coming to the tabernacle and asking mercy on the Lord. And right while this was going on, probably in a tent very close to the entrance of the tabernacle, this is what happens in verse 7. Now when Pinchas the son of Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest saw it, he rose from among the congregation, took a javelin in his hand. He went after the man of Israel, that was Zimri, into the tent, and he thrust both of them through. Who? Cosbi, which was the Midianite princess, and Zimri, who was a chief of the tribe of Simeon. He thrust them through, the man of Israel, and the woman through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel, and that's where after this, he gets the covenant of peace was made with the sons of Eleazar. Does everybody understand the context here? Okay, so what you have here is there's what I call idolatry creep. It creeps in to the covenant people. It starts on the outside and eventually gets on the inside. In Numbers 25, it started when they were trading and working with the Midianites, and then eventually they got enticed into their worship, and eventually it made its way all the way to the door of the tabernacle. Like these fallen angels is what we're dealing with. Baal Peor, that fallen angel was brazen to basically say, "I'll get my people to do whatever I want right next to the tabernacle of the Lord." That's how brazen these fallen angels are, and that's what they created here. And so, in my opinion, this was what was getting ready to happen with Eli and his sons. There was this harlotry, this fornication was starting to creep in to the true worship. All right. So even the word Zana is not used in this case. Hophni and Pinchas were turning Shiloh into a shrine, a that looked like the nations. That's what they were, in my opinion. That's what they were doing, and their actions were a complete abomination. Once Eli was informed, they should have been replaced immediately by someone else who was not corrupted by their power. But maybe Eli didn't have a choice. There may not been anybody to go to. All right. Any comments before we go to the third thing? Any other comments on this?
Robert,
Why
acacia,
wouldn't he have a choice?
Hang on a second, Mom. Go ahead, Paul. Say that again.
the acacia tree is not with thorns.
Yeah, it's called Hebrew word shittim, and it's grown all over. It's very similar to mesquite. It's very similar to the mesquite trees in Texas. It's
Okay.
actually the same family. And so what happens is it grows like a bush, right? But where the wood is way down. It taps deep down into and so they have to pull the whole thing up. And if it's watered properly, then it grows tall like mesquite does. But if mesquite
Right.
doesn't grow tall, then you have to go down and get the root, and that's what they use for furniture and stuff
The
like that.
hardwood. Yeah.
The hardwood, yes. Okay. And just like mesquite, shittim wood or acacia is worms and parasites can't really touch it. It's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so this is number three. And I think everybody can pick up on this pretty easy. There's actually no accountability at Shiloh, no whatsoever. From the top to the bottom, there was nobody who was going to hold them accountable. The people were complaining, and Scripture clearly tells us that Eli was aware of the misconduct, and the people were in open revolt. We read here in 1 Samuel 2:17. Therefore, the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred, despised the offerings of the Lord. So the people were already there. And then in verse 22, now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel. Where was he getting it? The people were telling him, and how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle meeting. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings with all the people." So if you notice, the word here for heard and hear, both those words is a word for Shema. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. I hear and obey. To hear and obey is the word that's being used here. So when you read Deuteronomy 6:4 and it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one," that word for hear is the same word that's being used here. It's Shema. And so, in other words, it's not just knowing something, it's doing something about it. And that's the same thing when it applies when the Spirit of God exposes something in your life. It's one thing to hear it, it's another thing to do something about it. And that's what Eli was not doing it. So he does confront his two sons, but to me, they only hardened their hearts because God was setting them up for he was going to deal with them like Abihu and Nadab. And if you're not in a relationship, then you don't have any fear of God, and then your heart will defend your sin. Let me say that again. If you're in no relationship with the Lord, then you have no fear of the Lord, then you will defend your sin to your dying breath. You will hang on to it to your dying breath. And I think that's what's going on. And I think a lot of people are in that situation where your sin is more powerful than the frontal cortex is not working. All right. Any comments on that? Okay.
Fine.
All right. So 1 Samuel 2:27. So then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, did I not clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest," referring to the sons of Aaron, "to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, to wear the ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the offerings of the children of Israel made by fire. Why? Remember, there was what happened at the golden calf. It was transferred from the firstborn of Israel to one tribe. Why do you kick at my sacrifice? Why do you despise it and my offerings, which I have commanded in my dwelling place? And honor your sons more than me, to make yourself fat with the best of all the offerings of my people. So the word here implies that not only was Eli's son profiteering, they're profiting from the corruption, but I think Eli was benefiting from it as well.
How was
Mm.
Eli benefiting?
So when the offerings come in, right? Uh, and if all the meat and all the offerings, the wine libations and everything is staying with them, he's eating off that too. And
Mm.
and
Oh, of
it
course.
even implies that he was heavy set. We'll find out later how heavy he was. So
Mm.
he was gorging himself on the same thing. He was taking a blind eye. Um,
Mm.
it's, this is so that's what I'm saying. The fish stinks from the head down, right? The whole thing stinks. So it stinks from Eli, but I think even though he was not actively involved in the corruption, he was taking a blind eye to it and allowing his sons to get involved in it. Okay. Verse 30. Now therefore the Lord God of Israel says, this prophet speaking to Eli. He said, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. He's going to keep his promise with that. But now the Lord says, far be it from me, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. All right, and that's what's happening is the honor that the priesthood had would slowly diminish, start to diminish the way they were viewed. Behold, the days are coming that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house. What he's referring to, the arm, when he refers to the arm, he's talking about his right arm, this is children, his sons, so that there will be not an old man in your house, and you will see an enemy in my dwelling place, despite all the good which God does for Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. Now this, verse 34, I jumped ahead here. Now this shall be a sign to you that will come upon your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, and in one day they shall die, both of them. So, because Eli chose to turn a blind eye, his sons would be cut off for the living, and Eli would die in his old age as well, and he would be the last of the old high priest. After that, they would either transfer of age at 50, or they would die before completing their priesthood. Okay. And second,
Oh,
God would send a foreign army. We know the Philistines were going to destroy Shiloh in the next 2 to 5 years. Something's going to happen at Shiloh and it's going to bring it down. All right. So
Robert, do you
Eli,
think,
go ahead, Mom.
excuse me, yeah, relating back to the fact it said, and he was old. So do you think as he got older, his mind apparently diminished, his energy diminished, and maybe he was stricter with his kids earlier, but he began to be senile in a way. So that was the protection that was given by saying they couldn't serve after they were 50. Isn't that correct?
Well, what's interesting about what you said, Mom, is original intent at Mount Sinai. It was established that from age 30 to 50 they would serve, right? So
Yeah.
you would have a 10-year apprentice from age 20 to 30. You would apprentice, okay, and then
Okay.
at age 30 you would get into the priesthood. That includes the high priest himself, and at age 50 they would go into a teaching role, okay.
Uh-huh.
And so, by the fact that he was serving at 98, it means that they were already violating one of the things that was set forth at Mount Sinai. They weren't keeping that commandment that was very
Right.
specific about. And I think, and I think this applies to a lot of things in life. When I was in the military, every 3 to 4 years, you had to move into a different position as an officer. They never kept officers in the same place. They move them out. They keep moving them out. And you see, like in business, very rarely, CEOs will get stale and the board will move a CEO out of the way. What happens after time is your purpose and your passion and your focus on the mission wanes over time. It's human nature. And so it doesn't mean that a person can quit having something that's going to have them have effectiveness in the kingdom. It just means that at some point you gotta turn it over to a younger generation. And you look at our Senate. Our Senate is a perfect
Mm.
example
Right.
of 80-year-olds who don't want to change. They're stuck in their same ways, and they will never change unless there is term limits placed on these people. We will have the same chaos in our government as the government right there we see in the during this period of the judges. So yeah, Mom,
Mhm.
I think it's a good point. Any other comments on that? Okay. So Eli was warned not just by a prophet, but by the people, but God directly himself told him. And how did he do that? He brought Samuel into his house and he was raised by Samuel. So not only was he going to get it from this prophet, not only was the people saying it, Samuel, this young child out of the mouth of babes, was going to give the same message that it was time that he would be cut off, a new line of leadership would be brought in. It wasn't that Eli didn't chastise his son, he just didn't restrain them, okay? And as a leader of a congregation, a household, if you have somebody, if you're a preacher or pastor and you have an associate pastor or you have a music minister who's involved in something, you have to shut it down and move them out of that position immediately. There's a proper way to do that. You have witnesses, you go through a process, you counsel them, you don't stop loving the individual, but you have to shut it down. And this is why I think that the Catholic Church is in such a mess because they never all they did is they take the problem, they just push them onto somebody else, and that same horrible, disgusting priest would do the same thing in another town to another child, and it wouldn't go away. You have to shut this stuff down. So when you become aware of it, you don't continue letting sin to thrive in your house. Uh, and there's a lesson that I think that happens uh, down into the micro level, into a family. If you have a rebellious son, at some point you have to put that son out if he's destroying the whole household, and that's hard to do. But leadership is leadership, whether it's a household or it's the house of God. Either way, it's still a house.
It's called
Uh,
Tough Love by James Dobson.
yeah, that's right. it, expelling Hophni and Pinchas from the tabernacle was really the only course of action, in my opinion. If they refused, if let's say they refused, okay, if Eli said, "Okay, you got to go," then guess what would happen to them? The same thing that happened to Abihu and Nadab. God would struck them down. So if they refuse, they were, it's the high priest rules and he's in charge. Okay. So either way, Hophni and his brothers were cut off from the land of the living and would fall directly into eternal judgment for what they did. All right. So I have always seen in my life that whenever something gets corrupted, God cuts a new line of leadership. He always does this. And sometimes through chaos, you don't see it. It's not readily apparent, but God is working a new line. He's gonna restore order. He's gonna eliminate the corruption. So how he did it? This 8-year-old child, Samuel, who's being raised in Eli's house, is that new line that's going to clean the corruption up. He will clean the corruption up in the nation and begin to restore order. And as we read this, you're going to see how he does it. And as Samuel gets old, his sons begin to do the same thing as Hophni and Pinchas, and he loses control of his household. Um, so First Samuel 2:18, but Samuel ministered before the Lord even as a child. This is interesting. He ministered before the Lord even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. So even though Hannah was disconnected somewhat from raising her son, she's still connected to him every year during the tithe. She'd come up and she would help her son as he was growing up in this house. And then says in verse 26, that's in verse 18, that he ministered before the Lord. And then verse 26, and the child Samuel grew in stature and in favor both of the Lord and men. And this is a really important statement that the people began to see that, hey, Samuel is the leadership that's coming. They could see it. So and you know what? This happens a lot. You go in a company and you have an up and coming leader who's honest, takes care of the people, and he may not have the position, but people recognize it way before the person actually takes the position, and that's what was happening with Samuel. Uh, I was talking about earlier about how leadership grows stale. At 98 years old, you may mean well, but I think you're way past your prime as far as doing the avodah, doing the service. And so I think that's why Eli should have stepped down at this point. 1 Samuel 2:34 says, now this shall be a sign to you that will come upon your two sons, on Hophni and Pinchas, and one day they shall die, both of them. Then I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind. And see, that's so, sometimes we look at our nation, we see corruption. We saw the last 4 years was just a mess, but the Lord is working behind the scenes that we can't see. He's grooming and bringing people along that will come into place, and if they don't do the job, then he'll cut it off and bring somebody else in. And so I think this is where, as a believer, we should always have the confidence that in the background, he's doing something. If the people are crying out, if they legitimately are crying out about an injustice, he will restore order. But if they're silent, they don't say anything, then you keep your leaderships just the way you like them. So, that's why in Egypt they started crying out, and God brought Moses. In this case, they were crying out, and He brought Samuel. And this is repeated over and over and over throughout time. Finally, this is questions that when I read this, because this kind of hits home. Whenever you've ever been in a leadership position or you've ever contemplated this stuff, there's some questions that I think you always have to ask. Does your life, does my life, does our lives reflect the will of God? Are we walking in where He wants us in the kingdom? Like Samuel, do we have the heart and mind of Adonai in His purpose? Are we walking? Is this something that we're walking in? And are you praying to know for a fact that you're walking in His purpose? And are we a faithful priest of God? And when I say priest, we are always going to, as it says in First Peter, we are called to be a royal priesthood, and there's very specific meanings to that. So, are we serving as faithful priests before the Lord? In other words, spreading the good news, telling somebody about our King and how wonderful He is and the things He does. Are we doing that? And if those three things we can say yes, then you have a good relationship with the Lord. You know that it's a healthy relationship with Him, and and you can avoid a lot of challenges when you get into leadership. I think there should be a playbook, a Samuel playbook that you read before anybody gets into leadership, because it tells you a lot about how to avoid a mess. Okay. Any comments or questions on it before we turn off the
No.
recording?
So
Okay.
what line is priest